Hi, welcome to Nina in the Kitchen. Today I'm making puff pastry because Ursula has requested it, and I wanted to make puff anyway. I'm going to do it totally by hand, meaning my beloved food processor is being left on the shelf. So let's get going. What I have here is 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour mixed with 1 1/4 cups of cake flour. And I'm just going to add a tablespoon of salt, mix that all together. And then over here, I took a little bit of the flour out of this mixture, and I'm going to use that for the butter block, and that comes later. So I'll put that off to the side. Then I have 1 1/4 cups of ice water, and I'm adding a teaspoon of white vinegar. And what the vinegar does here is it actually, it tenderizes your dough. To that, I'm adding 8 tablespoons of butter. This is the same technique that you would use if you're cutting fat into any pastry. So this is how you do it. You use your fingertips, not the palms of your hands, because your palms are hot. Your fingertips aren't quite as warm. So you just cover this butter up and just sort of squeeze the flour into the butter. It's as simple as that. A lot of people have a fear of failure when it comes to puff pastry, which is a shame. Don't stay away from it. Now, what I've done is I've made this so that it's very crumbly. It's sort of like the texture of a coarse sand, which is perfect. That's exactly what I want. I made a well. Now I'm just going to add some water to that. I don't know that I'm going to use the whole thing, so I put 1 cup of water in there, and I'm saving 1/4 of a cup. Now I'm just going to go in with a spatula, just push it up from the bottom, and what I'm going for is shaggy dough. I have a little bit of flour off to the side, and the reason for that is once you start a project like this, you don't really want to keep putting your hands into your big flour bin. Let me get back in here. And that butter is unsalted butter. It's a little chillier than room temperature is how I started working with it. This dough feels pretty good. So let me turn this out on the counter. I'm just going to just throw a little flour down. If you're not sure about your dough, if you're not sure if it's too wet or too dry, you want to err on the side of it being too wet, because you can always add flour to dough. It's much harder to add a liquid to dough. Let's just gather all of this together and see where we are. This feels pretty good. If you want it to feel sort of like a Play-Doh. What happens with puff pastry is you have a layer of dough and then a layer of butter, and you build that up to be about 1,000 layers. It's called, I know I'm going to mess up this word, mille-feuille. No. Anyway, it means about 1,000 layers. When we finish this is going to be about 1,200 layers of puff. Now, 8 by 7. I'm going to put this in plastic wrap and put it in the freezer for just about 10 minutes. And magically, some plastic wrap appears. So I rolled this out to 8 by 8, and I'm putting this in plastic wrap. This goes into the freezer for about 10 minutes. And while this is chilling in the freezer, and in the freezer only because it's a little less time that it spends, if you put it in the fridge, you can keep it in your fridge for about 30-40 minutes maximum. After that, the fat gets too brittle, and I'll talk about that when we get to the butter block. So in this goes, and I'll be back in a minute. So now we're on to the butter block. I kept this flour aside, and I'm going to pound it into my 3 sticks of butter. So in total, we're using 1 pound of butter to get 2 pounds of puff pastry. The reason for putting the flour into this butter is that I'm using American butter, and American butter does not have as high of a butter fat content as European butter does, and so if you're using European butter, skip the flour part of this, but if you're using American, you're going to want it because our butter is actually, it ends up being a little more brittle. So this came right out of the fridge, which is very chilly, and it's too brittle to use. Now what I do, this is the easiest way I've found to do this. I'm going to break this butter up, going to cut it up. And by the way, just in large chunks, by the way, you're going to want, I have an 18-inch ruler here, which I use just for baking. And I find 18 to be a perfect length. I also have a pastry brush. I think I'll use this wide one just for dusting off your flour, because you will have to add flour, but you don't want to add an excessive amount because you're going to get a tough product. So I use these brushes. This is not a pastry brush. Pastry brushes cost about $8 for one brush about this size. It's a natural bristle brush. So I went to the hardware store and I bought all of these natural bristle brushes for less than I would pay for one pastry brush. So that's my little economic tip for you today. So what you do is, this butter has to be floured, and you may not end up using all of this flour. If you're working in a kitchen where the counter is hot, you can still do puff pastry. What you want to do is just get a bag of ice or a pot that you've kept in your freezer or a pan, and just put it on the surface that you're working on. Now, this quart-size Ziploc bag happens to be, I measured it, 7 inches by 7.5. I have an 8-inch block of dough. So this will be a perfect size to match up with my dough. And the way that I'm going to use this is I break the butter down. You do this so that you smooth it out. In this case, we're also doing it so that the flour is incorporated into the butter. Okay, and now I'm just going to roll this to make sure that I get butter in all of these little crevices. What you want is a butter that's flexible. If you can bend this and it snaps, it's too cold. So butter that's flexible. And you want it to be not the same temperature as your dough, but you want it to be the same texture as your dough. I'm just going to get a scissors or a knife and cut the butter block out of here. Well, I just took the pastry out. As soon as I finished the butter block, I went back and the pastry is nice and chilly. It's not too, it's flexible. Now I need this to be 8 inches by 16. So I'm going to roll it in one direction only. You don't want to roll this way and then this way because you're going to develop gluten. This is a very tender dough, and if you've never had homemade puff, it's such a treat that it will be hard for you to go back and get another box of that other stuff. And by the way, only use butter, and only use unsalted butter, because when you buy salted butter, you don't know how much salt you're getting. Different companies put different amounts in. So I have 9 by 17. I will take it. And then what you do, because the edges are rather important, so you'd have to be a little fussy. So what you do is you just sort of square everything off, either with your ruler or with some sort of straight edge. The butter goes on. And you do actually want this little edge right here, and you'll see why in just a minute. So what we're going to do is fold this dough over the butter and pinch it on the edges and seal it in. Let me show you that. So you just go around and you pinch all the way around, or you can use your pin, whatever you find easiest. If you use butter that's too brittle, it will pierce the dough and shatter through the layers that you're trying to build. If you use butter that's too soft, it will come out of these sides. And either way, the result is the same. And what it is that you end up losing layers that we're trying to build. Because if it's too soft, the butter kind of bleeds into the next layer. If it's too brittle, it will shatter. At this point, we have not done a fold. We've just put the butter into the dough pad, or the dough block, I should say. Now we're going to roll that out, and from now is when you start counting how many turns you're doing. So I do 2.5 sets, and you'll see what a set is in just a moment. Whenever you roll dough, never roll over the edge, because that will pinch it up against your workbench. Now I'm going to do what is called a single fold or a 3-fold. And what it is you take your dough with a straight edge, and you go up 1/3 of the way, and then you bring the top part down 1/3 of the way, like you would fill an envelope. And then you want to make sure that your edges are right out to the end, because if they're like this and bunched up, then this is not going to have a layer to it. So you want to go right up to the edge, lift this up, turn it 90 degrees, and it doesn't matter if it's 90 degrees clockwise or counterclockwise. And we're going out another 16. Do as many folds as you can. If it gets too warm, then stop. So now we're 18 by 7. I'll take it. Now I'm going to do what's called a double fold or 4-fold. You go up 2/3 of the way with your dough, and then you bring this edge up to meet it. But you see, this edge is too doughy. I don't like that. So what I'm going to do, there's too much dough, not enough butter right there. So I'm just going to take that off and say I really haven't lost much. Okay, so now we have a double book fold. I'm going to pinch these edges together. And then fold it again. And now we have 4 layers. So the first time we did 3 layers, now we did 4. This is getting a little warm. I'm going to wrap it back in the plastic, put it back in the freezer, and in another 10 minutes or so, take it out, and we can continue. I should have a white apron on days when I do these baking things. I have flour everywhere. So I'm just going to dust this again. Now, what we've done is we made the butter block, rolled out the dough, folded it, turned it, rolled it out again. So the dough has been stretched this way and also this way. So you let it rest. That's a good place to let it rest, because otherwise it's going to fight you and it's going to be harder to roll out. So one set is a single fold and a double, and that's what I call a set. I'm doing 2.5 sets, and that will give me 1,296 layers. You always want to make sure that your dough can move, because if it's not going anywhere, then you're stuck to the table. You know, these layers are not stuck to each other. So what some people do is you can wet this dough down to make it stick, or you can do what's called a lock. And what the lock is that you take your rolling pin and you just gently tap just to press the layers into each other. And now this next one is going to be a double fold, and then that will be my second set. Back for another 10. I just took this out of the fridge, actually. We ended up having to postpone the shoot, so I took it out of the freezer, put it in the fridge. So what I'm getting at is it's pretty malleable. You don't have to, you're not going to be a slave to your dough. And so again, easy thing to do. This is the last rollout, and this is the what I call half set. So I'm just going to roll this out and do a single turn, and that will give us 1,296 layers. So there's your 1,296 layers. And that's it, we are done. Stretch it out one more time and cut this in half. It'll be 1 pound, 2 ounces each. I'll do that right now. The other thing is you don't want to put, you want to use the weight of your rolling pin, but you don't want to push into this dough because that's another way to break through the layers. And you don't want to do that. So I'm just going to cut this in half, and this is going to, each half is going to be 1 pound. This is 8 inches, so I'll cut it in half. Here are all of your layers. What I'm going to do is package this up and freeze each one of these as 1 pound packages. Now, just think about it. We took 1 pound of butter, so let's say it costs $4 wherever you live in the US. $4 for a pound of butter, that makes 2.5 pounds of puff pastry. Whereas if you go out to buy puff pastry, 1 pound of puff pastry costs, in my area, costs about $5. So you're paying $1 more for an inferior product and you only get half as much. So if you want to put the time into doing this, I highly recommend it. You'll never taste anything better. It's so delicious. I don't think you'll be disappointed at all. Let me show you how I wrap it. Here's how I set it up to go into the freezer. I don't know when I'm going to use this. This is not a terribly long process to make this, but I have kept this for up to a year, and I know I shouldn't tell someone to freeze anything for a year, but it was perfectly fine after 1 year in the freezer. And here's how I wrap it. I put it in plastic wrap, and a double wrap would not be horrible. But I put it in plastic, and then from there, I put it in a heavy-duty foil. And then from there, I label it with what it is. I have the date on here, and this is 1 pound, 4 ounces. Then I put it in a Ziploc baggie and a freezer bag, squeeze as much air out of that as I can, and that goes in the freezer. So I hope all of this has inspired you to not be afraid of the puff. Get in the kitchen and make your own puff pastry. It is so delicious, you won't believe it. Please like and subscribe, and NinaInTheKitchen.net for the recipes, Nina in the Kitchen on Facebook, and thanks for watching, guys. Bye.